Okay, today we are looking at the question, what are you? And the answer that I immediately give is you are more than meets the eye. Of course, we know that. What question we're asked most of the time is, who are you? What are you is a very different question, and it'll bring a very different answer. Who are you usually prompts the answer of what you do or what you're interested in, a lot of the personal things about us that would define who we are. What we are is a spiritual question because it implies something much more than the personal identity, which we'll get into here. What does more than meets the eye mean? We've all heard and probably used the phrase, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We mean there's a lot more to a thing than meets the eye. The iceberg is in fact an appropriate graphic to use when we consider the nature of our being. I've used this before and I love this picture. This is not a photograph. It's not something any human being has actually seen in one view, because you can't see the top and the bottom of an iceberg, but they understand what they look like by diving around them. And I was listening to the story of a woman who was, I think she was with National Geographic, and she had the job of going out and filming this particular iceberg. I can't remember why it was so famous, but it was of interest to science, so she went out and made a documentary on it. And while she was filming it, the thing turned over. And they were diving down into the iceberg in caves and stuff that were there. And it just so happened that at a moment when they were not on it, it turned over. And it sounded, she said, like a bomb went off. And nobody knew what it was, what was going on, but they were very fortunate to have escaped that. And that was in Antarctica. It was, down there where there's no doctor nearby except what you take with you. And they had medical care and all that. But those things are really interesting to me. I just don't really want to go down there to witness that kind of thing. But this picture is, I've used this before as an illustration to talk about us, because it's such a good illustration. It's a natural thing, and just a good way to think of who we are. The iceberg exists in two worlds simultaneously. Scientists tell us that the proverbial tip that is above the ocean surface represents about 10% of the entire mass. The part that is submerged in the world of water represents about 90%. And there's disagreement, as there always is with experts, on the percentage, but it's pretty much that, 10 and 90. So we can say the same thing about ourselves. Our surface, including our body and personality, only makes up 10% of who we are. The remaining 90% is our soul. It's powerful to visualize and meditate on this concept. So if you think of the part of the iceberg that we see as the part of us that we see, the part that we introduce to people, that we interact with people, it's the surface part. It lives in the world of air. The soul that is not seen, this is what all the near-deathers say, is that when the tip of the iceberg drops off, there is a much broader essence that many call the soul or the divine self, whatever name we give it, but it's beneath the surface and the world doesn't see it. But because it's there, the surface part exists also. It rests on that part that is unseen. So it's a very appropriate thing and a wonderful picture to hold in mind and think of yourself. Just the way I think of myself on a daily basis basically is the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that, I may sense there's a greater reality. But a graphic like this helps us to get a kind of a mental picture of what that's like. And of course, we're talking about a physical thing here, but the world of air, where the tip of the iceberg exists, that represents the three-dimensional world that we see, whereas the ocean that's a whole other realm. We would think of that as the kingdom of God, or the divine spiritual realm that we in whom we live and move and have our being. It's a deeper reality that is unseen. And it's so easy to think we are just that 10%, because as we say here, it's probably fair to say most people spend 90% of their time and energy thinking about the 10%, and 10% of the time and energy thinking about the 90%. Did we get this from our biblical teaching on tithing, where 10% goes to God? And I have actually heard this, that we are to tithe 10% of our treasure, our time, and talent, the three T's, I guess. But it's this notion that, and if you think about your own, just how your mind works on a daily basis, where is your attention most of the time? I think we would all agree that we spend more time thinking about the tip of the iceberg than we do what's beneath. Probably people like us in this type of thinking think more about what's beneath the tip of the iceberg. I do think about it a lot, and consider what it means, and engage in that imagery. And through meditation, of course, that introduces us to that 90%. But still, most of our thinking is geared to the 10%. And it may be as much as 90% of our thinking geared toward the 10%. When I wrote a series of articles on tithing, I pointed out that we don't think of giving 10% to God so God will somehow do favors for us. That's sort of how it's thought of. Often it's, put me to the test, says the Lord. Give your 10% and see if you're not more prosperous. What I said in my articles is that we give the 10% to remember that really 100% is God. 100% is God's. The iceberg is 100% iceberg, above and below. It's one thing, but it expresses in different ways. So we're not bargaining with God through our tithing. We are reminding ourselves that all that we have, all that we are, is God. It's not just 10%. So it's not giving up anything. It's remembering. It's remembering that we are operating in this cosmic flow that is giving and receiving. If it stopped giving and it stopped receiving, it would be self-defeating. So everything is designed to give and receive, to be part of this cosmic flow. There's not two icebergs. There's one. There's not two worlds. There's one. There's a world of air, there's a world of water, but it's one world. And it depends, they both interact with each other. They're both intertwined. I was looking at some pictures from Mars from the rover yesterday, which I find extremely fascinating, and I could swear somebody photographed Grand Junction, when I look at it. It's the red planet is it's just incredible, the photos they've gotten. But there's pictures of ice, and there's clouds. There's things going on there where there's water and potential signs of life, but there are no life forms that we've found so far, no evidence of that. Another interesting thing I was looking at was, you remember Voyager 1 and 2? They were launched in 1977, the year Beth and I were married. Expected to last 5 years. They're still going. 47 years. They're still sending back signals, and they've gone beyond our solar system. They're in interstellar space. Just unbelievably difficult to comprehend that. These little things, and they've got these plates. You remember Carl Sagan helped design the little plates with, they've got, I think, Beatles song recorded on them. They've got pictures of several messages on these plates that they hope if some alien ever tunes into it, they'll know that there's other semi-intelligent beings out there someplace that like Beatle music. But I don't know what that has to do with what I was saying, but this idea that we're now in this incredible place. You know, it's not two things, it's one thing. We think of outer space. What is outer space? The rover took, the Mars rover took pictures of Earth from Mars, and it looks like Mars from Earth. It's a tiny, tiny little spot up in the sky. But we live in this huge place. It's not two worlds, it's one thing. And we have this tendency to break things up. And we have this tendency to think of ourselves as human beings and spiritual beings, physical beings and spiritual beings. But what if we get this idea that we're all one thing expressing at different levels? Then we begin to start answering the question, what am I? I think that's one of the most important questions Jesus asked his disciples. He said, who do people say that I am? You know, they said some John the Baptist, some one of the prophets, some this or that, indicating that they embraced or considered at least the idea of reincarnation, which is kind of interesting. Well, we know they did. We know they considered that idea. But then the next question he asked is, well, who do you say that I am? Who do you think I am? What am I to you? And that, to me, is the question I'm trying to answer, I take that as a personal challenge. Who do I say that he was? I know who the church says he was, and I bought that for a long time, but I don't believe it anymore. I don't think that's who he thought that he was. The church answers through Jesus. You're the Christ, Son of the living God, and all that thing, what you would expect a church theologian to say. But that's not Jesus speaking. That's not Peter speaking. That's the writer, the author of the gospel, is speaking. But we are one thing. We are human beings, visible to everybody, and we are the biggest part of us, that reality that we are, that doesn't have birthdays, by the way, because it's eternal. I don't know how many birthdays we've all actually had, how many bodies we've had to have birthdays, how many candles we've blown out in our very long life of incarnations, probably quite a few. But there's a part of us that doesn't die and was never born. So what is that? And how does that work with the tip of the iceberg, the physical side that I am, that I'm expressing as? What practical value is there to knowing that, to holding that imagery? And the practical value is that this is a temporary experience, but it is we are in life. We are on this planet, but this is not all there is. That which is on this planet is not all there is. We are much, much more than what we see, than what meets the eye. And we all know this intellectually, but can we get to a point where it's always on our minds? When we're always thinking about it. And I'm not talking about sitting in a corner someplace with your legs crossed and eyes closed in a lotus position. I'm just talking about our daily thought. I don't think an hour passes any given day where I'm not thinking about this stuff, where I'm not considering what it means to be a spiritual being. I think about it more now than I ever have in my life. And I think I've come up with more answers to the question, what am I? It's something that the deeper we go, the more it opens up. The more we open up to different ways of seeing and thinking. What would happen if we gave 100% of our attention to the 90% I'm not suggesting we spend all our time in meditation. I'm suggesting we get in the habit of empowering ourselves with the image that we are a vast expression of God, poking our head into this three-dimensional world. We're told in the Gospels that Jesus would often go off and to a lonely place and pray. And I would take that as not pray so much as meditate, as contemplate. What am I? That to me was the source of his power. And one of the things, that put him at odds with the clergy of his day was what I think was his flagship discovery. The Father and I are one. That which we call God is me, and I'm expressing that. It's not two things any more than the iceberg is two things. Any more than the world of air and the world of water are two things. It's two ways of expressing one thing. And that, when Jesus began speaking like that the Father and I are one, and the instruction he would give to people, go into your inner room, pray to your Father in secret. Your Father who hears in secret will reward you openly. That would have been radical stuff. It's not radical stuff to us. We hear it all the time in this type of teaching. It's our primary teaching is go within. That you are the temple of the living God. Go within and find that connection. And you'll find it's not two things, it's one thing. You are expressing this one presence and one power. You look like a separate identity at one level, just like the iceberg looks like it has two separate identities, but it doesn't. It has one identity expressing in two ways. If you would, I think the last time I talked about the iceberg, I suggested that if you cut the top of the iceberg off, what would happen? It'd rise up. Another iceberg would pop up. On the human level, we would call that reincarnation. So that's an interesting thought to hold as well. There's something natural about that iceberg that will push up another one. And maybe that's what's going on in us. We live this life, maybe we live it in a way where we're satisfied that we did the best we knew how, or maybe we think we can do it better. And so we push up another tip of the iceberg once we go. I think that's quite possible. But wouldn't you see that as a natural, self-motivated way to do it? I'm not here because I've been thrown into this classrooms because I don't know enough. I might be here because there's a natural inclination in my being to push me into this dimension. Another body, another consciousness, another identity. Maybe I'd be a completely different gender. Maybe I wouldn't know. Like we're having some trouble figuring that out today. Maybe that doesn't matter. It's just the idea that there's a force that's beneath this tip of the iceberg that I am. And it's a very natural force. But that's kind of a whole different subject, but it helps us think in larger terms of what is pushing us, what is motivating us to be here. Do you think you're here by choice, or do you think you were thrown into this experience, or do you think you were created by accident? What was that thing I quote? Lulu from Hee Haw. 90% of the people on the planet are the result of an accident, or something like that. I can't remember what she said. It was pretty profound, whatever it was. That's possible, but do you think there are accidents? I don't really think there are accidents even when we call them that. I think in terms of births, I think it's a matter of choice, and sometimes the choice not to come through is a choice. The choice to maybe reach a certain point. I apparently had a twin that was stillborn 3 months before I was. And I don't know anything about that other soul, but maybe they just decided they didn't want to compete with somebody that was so brilliant. You know, I don't know. I don't know what their problem was. But they didn't come through. And I did. So you guys are lucky. Anyway, let's move on here. What does it mean to be spiritual, to be a spiritual being momentarily inhabiting this physical form? Armed with this awareness, what different choices can we make? What does this mean to be the person that I am in this moment? So that's what this is really designed to do, to keep us thinking about, I'm here I am. Why? Who am I? What am I? If it's my choice, why? And I think it is. Or if I'm responding as the iceberg would, if the scene part is cut off, then another begins pushing up. Why would that be? Why would there be something in the whole divine process that wants to manifest? And I think that's a very good question, because we, again, tend to think of the material world as two aspects, two different things. We have earth and heaven. That's kind of how we've been taught to think. That's why we put God up there, is because we make two separate things. It's the paradigm of separation. But it's one thing. And so why would I choose to be here, to come here? It's just a good thing to think about, a good question to ask. If I'm here because I want to be, then how would I answer that? How do I answer that? How do I think of that? This life is difficult. I heard a woman talk about it. She said it's like wading waist deep in peanut butter. And at first I thought, well, if you had a few crackers, that'd be okay. A little bit of honey. But I understood what she was saying, because when they describe life outside of this body, it's like there's no time and space. You think a thing and you're there. You know, think of a beautiful garden, you're there. Think of a person, you're there. People say they will think of their family while they're in the hospital being operated upon and they've just flatlined. They'll think of their family and they'll show up in the waiting room. And they'll see the guy going out and buying a candy bar at the vending machine, and they'll tell him about it later. He won't believe they were there because they were dead. But this world is bigger than we think, and it's one thing. It's not two things. So we have this tendency to think of two things all the time. But if I am part of this universe, I am whatever this universe is. I'm one with that. It and I are one. Or a more appropriate way to say it is God and I are one. And to spend all of my thinking, all of my questions center from that perspective. It broadens the way I think. I have a lot of interests living on this planet, a lot of things I like to do. I can spend money in all kinds of different directions. But the thing that interests me most is, why would I choose to be here? That's the thing that drives me the most, the question I ask the most, because if I understand that, and I understand I'm part of this big process, then if I understand who I am, I understand what it is as well. Jesus said that those who have heard from the Father come to me, because they understand what he's saying. They understand he's talking about not two things but one, and you're part of that one thing. So that's how he defined people. You're an expression of God. That's how he would encourage people to answer that question. What are you? You're an expression of God. And the Jewish leadership did not want to hear that answer, because if you are an expression of God, that means you have connection with God, which is going to dip into my salary. because I expect you to go buy a sacrifice, an animal, you'll bring it here, you'll sacrifice it, you'll pay me a sum of money, and we will make sure that your sins are forgiven, or whatever needs to happen. So he threatened the whole religious industry by saying, you and God are one. If you and God are one, the priesthood is not needed for that reason. And that was the primary reason, to maintain the connection and the good standing between human beings and God. You eliminate the middleman by saying it's all one, and I'm an expression of that. So thinking on your own institutionally is dangerous. Institutions do not like people thinking on their own. They like you to follow the way you're supposed to think. I saw one comment on, I think it was our Facebook page, that one of the commenters said, I remind myself often that he wore that crown of thorns for me. So that's a way of thinking that he bought into, that Jesus died, suffered and died for his sins. The whole mindset is, I'm born into sin. The traditional Christian thinking starts out with, what's wrong with you? Here's what's wrong with you. You're a sinner. You have no choice. You're born into it. But here's the solution. So it's a way of thinking that a person who delves deeper than that tosses that out. And in my thinking, I have made a distinction between the baby and the bathwater. Jesus is the baby. I'm hanging on to him because I think he taught exactly what I'm talking about right now. The bathwater is all the other religious stuff that we picked up that really has no meaning when you get past the dependency on the institution. And that can be scary for some people. It can be cause for anger in other people. I've had people on our YouTube channel, launch attacks on me for just talking like this. And I can understand why. We're living in, there's only one world, but we're living in two. we're living in two perceptions. One perception says God is within, God is everywhere present. The other says God is up there and you can offend him. Just like any other old man, you can offend. You say the wrong things, do the wrong things. You can get on the wrong side and you will need some kind of help. So with you talking like this, you're abandoning your chance of survival in the long term. And to me, that's irrelevant. I'm okay, and I will always be okay, and so will everybody else. But it took a long time to get there, and we have to walk with ourselves on that path. That is man-made religion. And we talk about spiritual revelation has nothing to do with man-made religion. The closer we get to God, the further we get from organized religion. That tends to be what happens. A lot of people who are in organized religion as a profession have never had a direct experience with God. And I've met many of them. There was a series on PBS. They were interviewing monks about the nature of God. And just listening to these guys talk, you could tell none of them had ever had a direct experience. They were not talking from direct experience. They were talking from their theological upbringing. And many of them were very unhappy the way they were talking. Mother Teresa is another example. They discovered letters from her confessing how unhappy she was, how distant she felt from God. And yet we have this picture, she's like an icon. Somebody calls you Mother Teresa, that's a compliment. I don't think Mother Teresa would have taken that as a compliment because she knew what she was going through, and apparently she was going through a great deal of suffering because she had this ideal that wasn't being played out. I had a good friend that was very famous in Unity, and she reached a point in her age where she was about to make her transition, and she too was very distraught by having spent her life talking about how great God and how present God was, and yet she felt abandoned because she had grown old and was about to die. And my response to her was, you're never going to die, and you ought to know that you're not growing old. Your body is, but are you your body? Haven't you taught all your life, all your ministerial career, that you're more than your body? Sometime we have to start believing what we talk about, what we embrace, what we see. And I think a picture like this iceberg thing helps us get that picture. There's apparently two things going on here, but it's all really one. And I am that. That's what I am. I'm two things going on, apparently, but I'm really one. I'm an activity of the cosmos that is expressing this time and place as me. You are a spiritual being manifesting through a physical body. The day will come when you will drop the body, but you will continue your experience. The you that you are will never cease to exist. That's one of the biggest fears that we hear from people in religious circles, is I'm afraid if I do not accept these teachings, I will cease to exist, or I'll be condemned to a life of absolute suffering forever. So we're learning something different with our near-death research. We're learning that that is a myth. It is not true. That people that lead some very spotty lives end up finding that they're not going to be condemned to eternal hell. That's a mindset, something that we learn from people that have never had a first-hand experience with God. Anyone who had a first-hand experience with God would never say that, because they would understand what they are, that their spiritual essence is indestructible. They would have that experience, and they would know that there is no condemnation. See, Jesus comes out and says that the Son of Man, the human being, has the power to forgive sin. Again, the Jewish leaders hated to hear that, because that threatened the industry. Only God can forgive sins, and I'm the end to that connection as a priest. So he was threatening their livelihood. But he really wasn't, because there are people like himself who had a livelihood that did not embrace that. He was doing pretty well, apparently. He had a treasure. He had a lot of very wealthy women supporting him. He operated on a low offering basis, apparently. But he succeeded at least for 3.5 years or so in a very popular ministry. So he did not buy into that. He would forgive people of their sins. A woman caught in adultery, very obvious that she was a sinner and should be stoned to death. He said, go on, don't do it anymore, don't sin again. They hated hearing that. But the first question, he said, is whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. And nobody cast a stone. So this belief in sin is a huge, powerful thing. It is central to Christian thinking. As I've said, you take sin away, you take away the whole system. It breaks it down. So let's take it away and see what happens. Let's ask new questions. If we don't have sin as a force that will send you to hell, let's get rid of that idea. We live in this one universe that is good, and we're part of that. We're expressing through that right now. The afterlife is not as mysterious as we might think it is. That's why they put everything after, where you can't see it. It's like the iceberg underneath. We can't see it, so we can guess, and we can make up all kinds of things about what it is. But let's go down, let's get our scuba diving gear on and go down and look at it for ourselves, see what it is. We have that ability. There's only one presence and one power, and we live in it, and we are conscious of it. We have the faculty to be aware of it. So let's explore it. This truth is an invitation to stop focusing on what you think is wrong with the 10% and stop trying to fix it, and affirm that 90% that lives beneath the surface of the material realm is what you are, and it's doing just fine. You believe that? You better. It's easy to understand how we misidentify ourselves. That 10% sure looks real. Most NDERs come back telling us that the realm they momentarily plunge into is the real, that this 10% is but a shadow of what we are. Our true home is the infinite ocean that is God. And at this moment, the largest aspect of our being is fully alive and well in its incredible home. That's why I think a graphic like this iceberg is so helpful. It's a visual, something we can see. I am that. I'm 10% here, 90% can't see, but I know it's there. That's me, the me that is me. That's what I am. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in Independent Unity, and have a wonderful week.